The idea of VET, which is VeChain's primary native token, hypothetically going to the price of 30 cents doesn't even seem that bad to me, even though nothing I say is financial advice. And the reason why I even say that is because usually I've been talking about VET and the idea of it maybe going to the price of $1 during a fully fledged type of altcoin season. But then some people out there, they want to, hear me talk about a different scenario, like, 10 cents or whatever. But I think that's a little bit hypothetically too low. So I want to talk about 30 cents. But even besides that point, why do I think VeChain is fundamentally amazing? Because I believe that these fundamentals could very well allow for it to maybe hypothetically perform pretty decent during a fully fledged type of altcoin season. But then again, the reason why is because if we take a look at VeChain, what is it focused on? It's focused on a market called supply chain management, at least generally speaking. I think that something like this is really not a market that is cool or interesting according to many people, but we have to think about how many businesses are out there. How many of them need to maybe improve their supply chain management? And you know what? Maybe somewhere along the way, kind of have blockchain technology assist it in a way or two. Who knows? So I think this could be hypothetically the way to go because, again, as perfect as a business could be, I think in one way or another, if it does really involve a lot of supply chain management, or should I say a lot of those supply chain aspects, I think maybe it could be improved, right? So then something like VeChain, I think is a no-brainer. If I do believe that there's going to be more businesses in the future, if I believe that there's going to be more enterprises that pop up, which hypothetically I do because I think that eventually, things are going to get better. And I think that, eventually there's going to be more and more businesses. I think something like VeChain is really helping a market that isn't cool or interesting, but then at the same time, I think has actual utility in the real world, I would say. Not to mention, we have to take a look at the VeChain Tor blockchain, which ever since 2018, allegedly zero network outages. Very impressive. I mean, that's very reliable. I mean, we just have to think about what the VeChain Tor blockchain has been through. Now, some people may argue that, it doesn't have the best adoption out there, but really, it doesn't matter in my opinion in the grand scheme of things because I think that if anything kind of highlights the rock solid reliability that the VeChain Tor blockchain has. It's not really considered that way, but I think that's really something that makes it unique and very interesting. Sometimes I see some news about, another network going down or having, to restart or whatever like that. But then again, if we take a look at zero network outages, that's something that I think is just very, very impressive. Not to mention, we have to take a look at how VeChain allegedly has been partners or has had partnerships, whatever the case may be. For instance, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte. We take a look at BMW, H&M. So I think in the grand scheme of things, when I take a look at something like VeChain, it's a very, I think, solid project in a sense that it doesn't have the most hype. It doesn't have the most fans, I would say, in terms of the attention. But then at the same time, it is something that I really do believe in because I like the utility. I like what it's trying to do. And not to mention, some people like to say, VeChain doesn't advertise enough. But really, we have to think about what they're actually kind of doing in terms of the advertisement side of things. Take a look at what they're doing with the UFC. You know what I mean? I think that's pretty massive. Also, what they did with Power Slap. So I think that when it comes to VeChain, yeah, sure, it doesn't have the best advertising of all time, but it's pretty decent. Because if we take a look at other projects out there that I think are a little bit comparable to VeChain, like for instance, Algorand or Avalanche, they don't really do much advertising, at least that I know of, or even not any that are really significant. But we have to think about how many people watch the UFC. I don't know too much about Power Slap, but then when I take a look at the UFC, hypothetically, I would assume that, there are a lot of viewers there. So then when they see VeChain and whatnot, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to know what it is, because if I showed VeChain on the UFC to pretty much 98% or 99% of the people that I know, they're not really going to know what that is, right? They're not going to really care. They're going to be like, okay, whatever, But then for the ones who do know, I think it is pretty interesting to see. And not to mention, I still think it does give, good exposure nonetheless, because who knows, right? Maybe a CEO of a large company or whatever is, looking to maybe improve their supply chain management and they happen to be watching the UFC, who knows, right? Then they see that. I have no idea, but again, it's just all speculation. I just think that VeChain fundamentally is great. Advertising, it's decent. It could be better, but I think it's pretty good nonetheless. Not to mention, I think that the VeChain Tor blockchain is very reliable in terms of its, reliability, right? I mean, this is I think a really fantastic project for me to believe in, even though I'm not telling anyone to buy VET, by the way. But then this is just my perspective and this is what I'm doing. However, even besides that point, we have to take a look at when it comes to VET, it's not the only token, so to speak, because we have to think about how when it comes to VeChain, there's something called VTHO, which stands for VeChain Thor Energy. It's basically kind of like a gas token a little bit, I would say. But then at the same time, again, I just want to make that clear. But I'm focused on VET here, which is, an acronym or whatever for the VeChain token. But even besides that point, when I take a look at VET and the idea of it at the price of 30 cents, around a 13x from here, market cap at that point, considering current circulating supply around 26 billion, it doesn't even seem hypothetically that difficult to me, maybe because, BNB reached over $100 billion in market cap back in 2021. And that was years ago. And I feel like even though the markets, generally speaking, many people would argue are not doing the best, I feel like the crypto space in a vacuum is actually very impressive, or should I say doing very well, because even though it may not reflect it in terms of the price of altcoins, take a look at the hype surrounding the Bitcoin ETF, the Ethereum ETF, take a look at the number of institutional investors, the amount of enterprise adoption. Not to mention, we have more crypto owners currently right now, allegedly, according to Crypto.com research, at over 600 million than ever before in history, right? Again, that figure. Think about how amazing that is and how we have that right now. That's not a projection, right? We have that currently, allegedly. Back in the peak of the 2021 bull run, only around 300 million crypto owners, and that was during the peak. So when people say, hey, the sentiment when it comes to cryptos aren't doing the best, well, it could do better in theory, but then in my opinion, it's actually very amazing. It's just the markets aren't doing the best. So if the markets aren't doing the best, it doesn't really matter, right, in the grand scheme of things, what is going on with the adoption here, because it won't really kind of live up to what it could be if, again, the other factors are not allowing it to do that. But then in my opinion, if, let's say, in theory, the markets do a lot better, let's say, I feel like it could very well be a catalyst or a starter for what could very well be the next leg up and maybe the start of a fully fledged type of altcoin season. But again, only time will tell. But I think, again, these factors I think are way more bullish than back in 2021, even though we haven't seen a fully fledged type of altcoin season. Maybe even if, let's say, the markets were doing very amazing, I think that even based off history, as a worst case scenario right now, wouldn't even maybe be a time yet when altcoins are supposed to peak. Now, let me explain why. Usually, altcoins, as a worst case scenario, they typically peak around 18 months after a Bitcoin halving event. Now, we add 18 months on top of the last Bitcoin halving event, which happened in April of last year. That's around October this year. So then, if let's say even the markets were doing really good, would right now be a time when we see altcoins peak as a worst case scenario based off history? Maybe not, right? So then why would I think the altcoin season is over? Why would I think there's no altcoin season? If anything, if the prices are low, that's a time where I actually want to focus on projects, right? Why would I FOMO into something when the price is already basically 10% near what it could maybe achieve during its peak? Why would I do that, right? That just wouldn't really make sense to me. But in theory, this is just the way to take a look at it. However, again, only time will tell whether or not that October date stays true or not. Who knows? Each cycle is going to be different, whether it happens later or maybe earlier. Who knows, right? But then I'm just saying, whenever it happens, there's only one thing I can control, and that is myself. And that is just by dollar cost averaging, holding, and just waiting. Literally, that's it. Beyond that, I can't control anything. However, 30 cents wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. And make sure to subscribe if you gain value from this video. Greatly appreciated. It's been Lee the Captain. I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm a peace. Bye.